The telephone line from Berchtesgaden to the Wolf's Lair crackled at 04.17 hours, Central European Time. Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel's hand trembled as he lifted the receiver. The message from Wehrmacht High Command West was brief, coded, and devastating. Allied airborne divisions had begun landing across Normandy. Amphibious forces were approaching 5 designated beach sectors. The Atlantic Wall, 2 years in construction, was under full-scale assault. Adolf Hitler had been asleep. No one dared wake him. This detail, later confirmed by multiple surviving staff officers and corroborated in post-war interrogations at Nuremberg, would define the first 6 hours of the invasion. The Führer, who had spent months insisting he alone could predict where the Allies would strike, had issued standing orders that no major armoured reserves could be moved without his personal authorization. And on the morning of June 6, 1944, as tens of thousands of Allied soldiers waded ashore under withering fire, that authorization could not be given, because Adolf Hitler was asleep. General Oberst Alfred Jodl stood in the operations room at the Berghof, staring at the map of France. Red markers indicating Allied contact points multiplied across the Normandy coastline: Caen, Bayeux, Sainte-Mère-Église, the Orne River bridges, Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, Sword. Each name represented a breach, each breach a failure. Jodl had seen this configuration before, in war games, in strategic assessments, in quiet moments when he allowed himself to think beyond ideology and consider only mathematics. The Allies possessed air superiority. They controlled the seas. Their industrial capacity dwarfed Germany's, and now they had a foothold in France. But Jodl did not wake the Führer. Neither did Keitel. Neither did SS Obergruppenführer Hermann Fegelein, Hitler's liaison to Heinrich Himmler. The culture of fear that had calcified around Hitler's inner circle had made such decisions unthinkable. To wake him without certainty was to risk his rage. To delay might mean disaster. They delayed. At 06:30 hours, as the sun rose over the blood-darkened surf of Omaha Beach, Hitler's adjutant, Hauptmann Heinz Linger, finally entered the Führer's private quarters. The curtains were drawn. The room smelled of stale air and medication. Hitler had been taking increasing doses of stimulants and sedatives, prescribed by Dr. Theodor Morell, whose treatments had begun to blur the line between clarity and dependence. Linger spoke softly. "Mein Führer, there is urgent news from France." Hitler stirred, his face pale and puffy. His hands shook as he reached for his glasses. He did not speak immediately. When he did, his voice was hoarse. "Is it the invasion?" "Yes, mein Führer." Hitler sat up slowly. He asked for tea. He asked for the reports. He did not ask why he had not been woken sooner. What followed, preserved in fragments by stenographers and recalled by officers present, was not the explosive fury his staff had feared. It was something colder, something more dangerous. Calm. Hitler read the reports in silence. He studied the maps. He nodded slowly. Then he said, with eerie certainty, "This is not the main invasion. This is a diversion. The real attack will come at Calais." He believed it, and because he believed it, the armoured reserves remained in place. The 12th SS Panzer Division Hitlerjugend, positioned near Lisieux, did not move. The Panzer Lehr Division, stationed south of Chartres, remained on standby. The 21st Panzer Division, the only armoured unit near the beaches, engaged piecemeal, without coordination or strategic depth. By noon, the Allies had established 5 separate beachheads. By nightfall, over 150,000 men were ashore, and Adolf Hitler, in his Alpine retreat, still believed Normandy was a feint. The Atlantic Wall had never been a wall. It was a concept, a propaganda image, a scattered chain of bunkers, gun emplacements, minefields, and beach obstacles stretching from Norway to the Spanish border. In some places, It was formidable, reinforced concrete pillboxes housing 88mm guns, overlapping fields of fire, interlocking defensive sectors. In others, it was little more than barbed wire and a single machine gun nest. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, appointed Inspector of Coastal Defences in late 1943, had understood this. He had driven the length of the French coast, notebook in hand, calculating angles, measuring tides, assessing weak points. His reports to Hitler were blunt. The defences were insufficient. If the Allies achieved a landing, the only hope was to destroy them on the beaches within the first 24 hours. After that, their material superiority would become insurmountable. Rommel had requested more men, more concrete, more mines. He had asked for the authority to position armoured reserves closer to the coast. Hitler had refused. The panzers, Hitler insisted, must remain centralised, mobile, ready to respond to the real invasion when it came. Rommel had obeyed, but Rommel had also begun to doubt. On the evening of June 5th, Rommel had been in Germany, visiting his wife for her birthday. The weather over the Channel was poor. High winds, low clouds, rough seas. Allied meteorologists had predicted a brief window of improvement. German meteorologists had not. Rommel, assured by his own staff that an invasion was unlikely in such conditions, had remained away from his headquarters. When the call came on the morning of June 6th, Rommel was 300 miles from Normandy. He did not return until late afternoon. By then, the failure was irreversible. But the failure was not merely tactical, it was structural, it was ideological. It was the inevitable consequence of a system built on the supremacy of one man's intuition over the collective expertise of a professional military staff. Hitler had insisted, repeatedly, that the invasion would come at Calais. The Pas-de-Calais was the narrowest point of the Channel. It was the most direct route to Germany. Logic dictated that the Allies would strike there, and Hitler trusted his logic more than he trusted intelligence reports, reconnaissance data, or the experience of field commanders. German intelligence had, in fact, been aware of unusual Allied activity along the southern coast of England. Aerial reconnaissance had noted concentrations of landing craft near Portsmouth and Southampton. Radio intercepts had detected increased coded traffic. Resistance sabotage of rail lines in Normandy had spiked in late May. All signs pointed toward Normandy, but Hitler's staff had learned not to contradict him, so the reports were filtered. The data was interpreted in ways that supported his conclusions. Officers who expressed doubt were reassigned. The machinery of command had become an echo chamber, amplifying certainty and silencing dissent. On June 6th, that system encountered reality, and reality did not negotiate. At 14 Mass hours, General Oberst Leo Geyer von Schweppenburg, commander of Panzer Group West, requested permission to move his armoured reserves toward the invasion zone. His tone, recorded by staff officers, was urgent but disciplined. He knew the protocol. He also knew the cost of delay. Hitler's response came 2 hours later. The armour would remain in place until the situation clarified. The situation was already clear. The 21st Panzer Division, under General Major Edgar Feuchtinger, had begun a counterattack toward the beaches in the late morning, moving through scattered resistance and destroyed bridges. By early afternoon, elements of the division had reached the gap between Juno and Sword beaches, nearly splitting the British and Canadian beachheads. It was the only moment on June 6th when a German armoured force came close to achieving a breakthrough. Then the gliders arrived. At 15:20 hours, the sky over Normandy filled with Allied transport aircraft and gliders. The British 6th Airborne Division's second wave descended east of the Orne River, landing reinforcements directly in the path of the 21st Panzer's advance. German tank commanders, watching hundreds of gliders descend in near-perfect formation, realized they were facing not a diversion, but an industrialized invasion, supported by air power and logistical depth they could not match. The 21st Panzer withdrew. No other German armoured unit engaged that day. The reasons were many: fuel shortages, Allied air supremacy, destroyed bridges and cratered roads, confusion over orders, fear of moving without authorization. But the core reason was singular: Hitler had not released them. Later, in war diaries and post-war testimony, German officers would describe June 6th as the day they understood the war was no longer winnable, not because of a single defeat, but because the system designed to win it had become incapable of responding to reality. The German army in 1944 was still, in many ways, exceptional. Its tactical doctrine was flexible, its NCOs were experienced. Its equipment, though outnumbered, was often superior in design. The Tiger II, the Panther, the 80-Dan Metro gun, these were formidable weapons, but none of that mattered if they could not be deployed. And on June 6th they could not be deployed because one man, in an Alpine villa, still believed the invasion was elsewhere. Hitler held his daily military conference at 16 hours. The attendees, seated around the long map table, included Keitel, Jodl, Fegelein, and a rotating cadre of operations officers and adjutants. The stenographer, a young corporal named Heinz Buchholz, recorded the proceedings in shorthand. Fragments of that record survived the war, hidden in a Berlin safe and later recovered by Allied investigators. The tone of the meeting was not panicked. Hitler spoke calmly, methodically. He reviewed the reports from Normandy. He asked questions about troop dispositions, weather conditions, and estimated Allied strength. Then he delivered his assessment. The enemy has committed significant forces to Normandy. This is intended to draw our reserves away from the Pas-de-Calais, where the true invasion will occur. We must not fall for this deception. Jodl attempted to present an alternative interpretation. Allied air superiority, he noted, had made large-scale troop movements nearly impossible. The concentration of forces in Normandy suggested this was not a diversion, but the main effort. Hitler interrupted him. The enemy has more divisions in England than he has landed in France. Where are they? They are waiting for us to weaken Calais. We will not. No one argued further. The decision was made. The panzers would remain in reserve. But something else happened in that room, unrecorded in the stenographic notes, but preserved in the memories of those present. Jodl, speaking years later during his trial at Nuremberg, described it as a shift, a flicker of something beneath Hitler's composure. Not doubt, exactly, not fear, but a recognition. He knew, Jodl said, not consciously perhaps, but somewhere beneath the ideology and the willpower he understood. The Allies had landed. They were not going to be thrown back, and nothing we did after that moment would change the outcome. Jodl's testimony was self-serving. He faced execution for war crimes. His words must be weighed carefully, but they align with accounts from other officers present that day, a strange, quiet realization that the machinery of the Third Reich had begun to seize. Hitler ended the meeting by ordering a counterattack to begin the following morning. Rommel would coordinate. The Luftwaffe would provide air cover. Victory was still possible. No one in the room believed him. By midnight on June 6, 1944, the Allies had suffered approximately 10,000 casualties, killed, wounded, missing, or captured. It was a heavy toll. Omaha Beach alone had accounted for over 2,000 American losses. Entire companies had been shattered in the surf, but the beachheads held. By June 7th, reinforcements were arriving at a rate the Germans could not match. By June 12th, the 5 beachheads had linked into a continuous front. By the end of June, over 850,000 Allied troops were ashore, supported by a logistical network that delivered fuel, ammunition, and supplies at industrial scale. The German response, by contrast, was fragmented. Counterattacks were launched piecemeal, without coordination. The Luftwaffe, reduced to a shadow of its former strength, could not contest Allied air superiority. Panzer divisions, moving at night to avoid air attack, arrived at the front under strength and exhausted. On June 17th, Hitler travelled to France to meet with Rommel and Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt at Margival, near Soissons. The meeting, held in a concrete bunker built years earlier for a planned invasion of England, was tense. Rommel urged Hitler to seek a political settlement. The war in the West, he argued, could not be won. Continuing the fight would only destroy Germany. Hitler refused. He spoke of new weapons: the V-1 flying bomb, the V-2 rocket, jet aircraft, advanced submarines. He spoke of divisions that existed only on paper. He spoke of willpower overcoming material disadvantage. Rommel left the meeting in silence. 3 weeks later, he would be implicated in the July 20th plot to assassinate Hitler. Given the choice between a show trial and suicide, Rommel would choose the latter. His death would be announced as a cerebral embolism. The truth would remain classified until after the war. But on June 6, 1944, in the first hours of the invasion, none of that had yet occurred. On that day, the question was simpler. Could Germany stop the Allies on the beaches? The answer was no, not because of a lack of courage, not because of poor soldiers or inadequate weapons, but because the system designed to defend Fortress Europe had subordinated military necessity to the judgment of one man. And that man, on the most critical day of the war, had been asleep. Later, historians would debate the significance of Hitler's delayed response. Some would argue it made little difference. The Allies' material superiority ensured success regardless. Others would point to the narrow margins at Omaha Beach, the vulnerability of the airborne drops, the fragility of the initial lodgment. A coordinated armoured counterattack in the first 12 hours might have collapsed the invasion, but that counterattack never came. And by the time Hitler realized Normandy was not a diversion, it was too late. The war would continue for 11 more months. Millions more would die. Cities would burn. The Reich would fracture. But the outcome, set in motion on June 6th, was no longer in doubt. In the archives of the German Federal Military Archive in Freiburg, there exists a fragment of a letter written by an unnamed staff officer, dated June 8, 1944. The letter was never sent. It reads, "We are still fighting, but we are no longer winning. I do not think we ever will again." The truly devastating reports arrived not on June 6th, but in the 72 hours that followed. At 08:45 hours on June 9th, General-Lieutenant Fritz Bayerlein, commander of the Panzer Lehr Division, sent a radio message to Army Group B headquarters. His division, considered one of the finest armoured formations in the Wehrmacht, had been ordered forward on June 7th. The march from Chartres to Caen, approximately 150 kilometres, should have taken less than a day under normal conditions. It took 3. Bayerlein's after-action report, recovered from German military archives in 1952, detailed the journey with mechanical precision. His column moved only at night, dispersed across secondary roads and forest tracks to avoid detection. During daylight hours, the panzers and half-tracks remained concealed beneath camouflage netting and tree cover. Allied fighter bombers, Thunderbolts, Typhoons, Mustangs, prowled the skies in continuous rotation, attacking anything that moved. On June 7th, the division lost 16 vehicles to air attack, fuel trucks, ammunition carriers, a recovery vehicle towing a damaged Panther. On June 8th, the losses increased to 23. Bayerlein watched his division bleed before it ever reached the front. When Panzer Lehr finally arrived south of Caen on the afternoon of June 9th, it was at 60% strength. The counterattack Hitler had ordered for June 7th was launched on June 10th. It failed. This pattern repeated across every German formation attempting to reach Normandy. The 2nd SS Panzer Division Das Reich, moving north from Toulouse, was delayed for 2 weeks by resistance attacks and Allied air interdiction. The division reached the front on June 23rd, having lost over 300 vehicles en route. The 9th SS Panzer Division, transferred from the Eastern Front, was intercepted by Allied intelligence before it even departed Poland. Its rail transport was systematically bombed, bridges were destroyed, marshalling yards were cratered. The division arrived in Normandy in fragments, spread across 3 weeks. The Allies, by contrast, landed supplies at a rate of 20,000 tons per day by the end of June. Prefabricated harbours, codenamed mulberries, were towed across the Channel and assembled off the invasion beaches. Fuel was pumped ashore through undersea pipelines. Entire airfields were constructed on French soil within days of the landing. The industrial machine that had outproduced Germany in tanks, aircraft and ships now demonstrated its capacity to sustain a multinational army across an amphibious supply line. Hitler received these reports in silence. His daily conferences grew shorter, his instructions became vaguer. Officers noted a change in his demeanor, not rage, not despair, but a kind of distant abstraction, as if he were calculating equations that no longer added up. On June 29th, he summoned General Feldmarschall Gerd von Rundstedt and General Feldmarschall Erwin Rommel to Berchtesgaden for another meeting. The conference, attended by Keitel, Jodl, and several staff officers, lasted 4 hours. The stenographic record is incomplete, but surviving fragments reveal the core of the discussion. Rundstedt spoke first. The situation in Normandy, he stated, was untenable. German forces were outnumbered, outgunned, and operating without air cover. Casualty rates were unsustainable. Replacements were not arriving. Supply lines were collapsing. The only rational course of action was to withdraw to more defensible positions along the Seine, consolidate forces, and establish a coherent defensive line. Hitler refused. Rommel then presented a more direct assessment. The war in the West, he argued, could no longer be won militarily. Every day the fighting continued, increased the destruction of Germany itself. The time had come to seek terms, to negotiate an armistice before the Allies reached the Rhine. Hitler's response was immediate and unequivocal. "We will never surrender. Germany will fight until victory or annihilation." Rommel pressed the point. What victory? With what forces? Against what odds? Hitler did not answer directly. Instead, he spoke of the Eastern Front, of Soviet losses, of German resilience, of the historical precedent of Frederick the Great, who had faced impossible odds and emerged victorious when his enemy's coalition collapsed. He spoke of wonder weapons, of divisions being formed, of the will of the German people. Rommel listened without expression. When Hitler finished, Rommel asked a single question. "Mein Führer, what should we do in the West?" Hitler looked at him for a long moment. Then he said quietly, "Hold." The meeting ended shortly after. Rundstedt and Rommel departed without the reinforcements, the air support, or the strategic flexibility they had requested. On July 1st, Rundstedt was relieved of command and replaced by General Feldmarschall Günther von Kluge. The official reason was health concerns. The actual reason, understood by all involved, was that Rundstedt had told Hitler what he did not want to hear. Rommel remained in command of Army Group B for 17 more days. On July 17th, his staff car was strafed by Allied fighter aircraft near Sainte-Foy-de-Montgomery. Rommel suffered severe head injuries. He was evacuated to Germany and never returned to active duty, but the machinery of denial continued to function. On July 20th, a bomb exploded in the conference room at the Wolf's Lair. Hitler survived. The conspiracy to remove him was crushed. Thousands were arrested. Hundreds were executed. The purge that followed eliminated the last remnants of independent military judgment within the Wehrmacht command structure. Officers who had questioned strategy, who had advised caution, who had suggested alternatives to total war, they were now suspect. Loyalty to Hitler became the sole criterion for command, and so the war continued. In the archives of the US National Security Agency, there exists a decrypted German radio transmission dated June 14, 1944, intercepted by Allied signals intelligence. The message, sent from an unidentified German headquarters in Normandy, was never delivered. It reads, "Request immediate relief. Casualties exceed 50%. No ammunition, no fuel, no air support. Situation unsustainable. Awaiting orders." The response, logged 3 hours later, consisted of 2 words: "Hold position." The transmission was filed, analyzed, and archived. It became one of thousands of similar messages intercepted during the summer of 1944. Each one told the same story. Each one received the same reply: hold. And they did. For 11 more months, through hedgerows and cities, through the Ardennes and the Rhine, German soldiers held their positions because they had been ordered to hold. Not because victory was possible, not because defeat could be avoided, but because the system that commanded them had become incapable of conceiving an alternative. On June 6, 1944, Adolf Hitler realized Germany could not win the war. But realization and acceptance are not the same. And so the killing continued, day after day, until there was nothing left to defend, and no one left to give the order to stop.